Hi everyone, my name is Simon Misiewicz and we're going to be talking about HR matters and regards to finance and tax. And in this session, we are going to be talking about redundancies. It's a topical situation going on because of coronavirus, and it is something that will continue through the months ahead. But before we go through to the details, let's welcome back Cheryl Willey again from PKHR. Cheryl, hello again.
Hi Simon, thanks for having me back.
You're very welcome. Before we go into the subject matter at hand, why don't you talk about what you are seeing in the marketplace in regards to coronavirus, furlough, and indeed the redundancy situation going on?
Yeah, so at PKHR over the last few weeks, we've definitely seen a trend towards an upturn in redundancies. Obviously, there's been an awful lot of businesses going back to work as well. So we've been doing an awful lot of work on helping people get their workers back off furlough. But yeah, the trend overwhelmingly at the moment is towards redundancies. And that's a real sad situation, but somewhat inevitable really with where we are.
I mean, let's talk about redundancy because people are obviously at home. Some of the people are on furlough, but probably the word redundancy doesn't mean too much to them. What is redundancy in reality?
So there's two different angles to redundancy. So it's when an employer can either completely cease trading, either completely so their business stops, or in a particular area. So, for example, if an employer or business has two different things that they do, so maybe they trade in lawnmowers and garden shears, but they keep going with garden shears, but they stop dealing with lawnmowers. Everybody in the lawnmower situation would probably be made redundant. So they don't have to stop trading completely, but stop trading in one area. Okay, but it also can be where the workload diminishes sufficiently that we no longer need the number of people that we once had doing that work.
Right. And from a perspective, most redundancy terms and conditions would be in someone's contract, wouldn't it?
Yes, so we would look at the normal contracts of employment for notice and termination clauses. There's probably a redundancy policy in people's handbooks, but there is a legal process, a statutory process that we have to go through. So even if the contract and handbook is silent on these matters and there's no policy there to be followed, we always divert back to the statutory process.
I mean, I've been in business near on 20 odd years. I feel old while saying that, but I've always felt that we should be using professional services such as yourself at PKHR. Would you recommend an employer, for instance, that has to go through furlough, then think about redundancy, that they get a specialist like yourself on board?
Absolutely. Dealing with the redundancy is fraught with danger areas. There is so much that you need to consider, and I've witnessed some stories and some thought processes over the last few weeks about people getting it horribly wrong and starting to go down an avenue that would have been entirely unfair, rendered all these dismissals completely unfair. So yes, always better to talk through your thought processes, your business rationale, even from that very, very early stage with professionals like us at PKHR.
Okay. I mean, talk about the employee in a business right now. There are going to be some very scared, frightened people worried about their livelihoods. What are the rights of an employee that is going through furlough and reality dictates that they will be made redundant at some point? What are the employee rights?
Okay, so the employees' rights are that they must be consulted with. So certainly where we've got employees with over 2 years service, they have to have a consultation process with their employers. So they can't just be phoned up one day or have a Zoom meeting or receive a text message to say you've lost your job. We see all of those things happening. Sadly, we do see them in the news that 140 people were laid off with a text message. That's not how to do it. So yes, they have to have a consultation meeting, and a failure to consult with employees can actually result in a tribunal claim. So that is a really important issue. They have to have alternative employment considered as well as part of that consultation process. So we have to look at different areas within the business. Now, normally outside of the time of COVID, we'd be looking at any other vacancies that the organisation might be recruiting for, but at the moment, obviously, recruitment has pretty much stopped for most employers. So there's not always those alternative vacancies there, but it still has to be thought about and considered. And of course, the most obvious one is the right to a redundancy payment as well. So of course, there are statutory calculations to be made, but employers can always offer an enhanced package if they want to.
From an employee perspective, obviously there are employers that are doing things by the law and by the book, but there are some dubious employers out there that are just kind of, like you said, making people redundant via a text message. Thanks for your service, but bye-bye. I mean, if an employee is going to be faced with that text message, what should that employee do?
Well, the first thing to do would be to get in contact with the employer and make them aware that that's not the correct process. In all honesty, turning the situation around and the employer at that point trying to legitimise the process is going to be very difficult because it looks like the outcome is prejudged, the decision is already made. But definitely open the dialogue with the employer at that stage to see what you can actually do, because your thoughts, your representations, your questions as an employee are completely valid, and they may actually change the situation. You know, the employer doesn't know whether you will reduce your hours or you could reduce your salary, or as a collective your team could do that, and it may just save some jobs. So it's always better to open that dialogue.
I mean, from someone that's an employee, and I've seen this on YouTube, funny enough, whereby the employer has disengaged with the employee, as in not answering the phones, not answering emails to that person, and said, right, you're not getting any more money, even though that the employer in question apparently obtained money from the government for furlough. So they're getting money from the government, not paying the employee. At that point, there is no engagement. So what can the employee do if the employer is just basically blanking them?
Well, that would be the time to go to ACAS. So the next stage on from that will be to perhaps look at a tribunal claim, to claim for unfair dismissal, failure to consult, all of those different types of things. But the first port of call in that is always ACAS. So ACAS will start a 30-day conciliation period to see if they can reach an agreement between the employer and the employee to kind of resolve the issues that exist between them. But certainly in terms of claiming furlough payments for somebody that's no longer there, then that's a fraud matter for HMRC.
We won't go into too much detail about that. From an employer that is doing the very best for the benefits of the employees and conscious and all that kind of stuff, what's the rights of the employer? Because obviously there is a financial economic downturn. There is cash flow particular issues. They may be claiming furlough, but at some point that furlough process will come to an end. What's the rights of an employer to safeguard the rest of the workforce?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So the first thing to do is to actually realise as quickly as you can that you are in that situation and that you do need to start thinking about redundancies. The furlough scheme is there and it's called the job retention scheme for a reason, but you don't actually have to keep people on the furlough scheme where you know that you cannot retain the job at the end of it. So if it's very obvious that that job no longer exists, it's not there to be done, and it won't be there to be done at the end of the furlough scheme, you can actually start the redundancy process now. And of course, it's worth thinking about the timescales that are involved in a redundancy as well, because depending on how many people you are actually planning on making redundant, you've got minimum consultation periods that you need to be thinking about. So that could be 30 days or it could be 45 days, depending on how many people you're looking at making redundant. But the process really from the employer's perspective is to look at who it is that they're making redundant. And when I say who, I don't mean Joe Bloggs or Mrs. Smith. It's the roles that we're looking at it, and it always comes back to the role rather than the people. So do not be tempted to cherry pick the people. You must look at the role.
And for employers that are listening to this, I mean, from my own background, I know the kind of process of furlough. you will not, as an employer going forward from July onwards, you won't get all of the money that you pay to the employee back. For instance, if you pay them a pension contribution, the government are kind of ceasing on those repayments. Employers' national insurance, that's also going to be ceasing. And then at some point, it's going to be reducing further from 80% down to 70%. So you are not, as an employer, going to be benefiting from those grants and repaying you for all those. So you will be paying people that are on furlough. But that is fair to say, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So from August, there is a financial cost to the organisation as well. So it's always worth kind of fast forwarding a little bit and seeing what that cost is going to be for your business, because for many businesses that still won't be in a position to reopen, or very, very limited income from their reopening, they may still not be able to afford the cost that the furlough scheme will put on them.
Mm. I mean, it's easy to look back at certain situations you see and joke about things, but some of the stories we talked about in terms of people text messaging, the fact that people are claiming the furlough but actually not giving that to the employee, are very serious matters. Are there any other scary things that you're seeing in the marketplace where rogue employers or rogue employees are not behaving in a way that they should?
Yeah, absolutely. Sadly, we do always see this, and it's about trying to counsel the employers and the employees to actually modify their behaviour. But going back to the redundancies, I've seen people, as we say, cherry pick the individuals and just completely forgetting about any fair selection processes and pooling the employees, and just downright fudging the process to get the end result. And sadly, I say sadly, employees are intelligent people. You've employed them originally for a reason, and they will always see through things like that. So yeah, but even down to the COVID secure measures, I've seen an awful lot of employers that just have no regard for it at all. They're expecting their employees to come back to work without any kind of protections, PPE, social distancing, expecting them to work very closely with their colleagues, again without the distance or the PPE. So yeah, there are some horrible things going on. I've not got many that are my clients, I'm pleased to say, but I do see it with other people in the HR profession.
I mean, you mentioned on your LinkedIn profile, let's just bring this up, a famous person. I'm happy for you to mention who they are. But there are so-called experts out there giving advice on this particular situation and clearly getting it wrong as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so I did have a little bit of a rant on LinkedIn a few weeks ago about a certain Mr. Money Saving expert who, as we talked about the minimum consultation periods, he was saying that all redundancies applied a 45-day minimum consultation period. And of course, that is really, really scary for small employers to think that they've got to carry people for another 45 days. And then what do they do in that 45-day consultation period? What does it look like? It was completely inaccurate. So yes, I did have a little bit of a rant about that. Please do not take employment law advice from somebody off the television.
Yeah, and to be honest, one of the reasons why I brought that up is simply because people do read things on Facebook, people do read things on LinkedIn, even on this YouTube channels that people see on different video channels, etc. Do take advice and think that is legally right. But from an employer perspective, again, we've sought out your services for some time now because we want to do things the right way, and I think that's always fair. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely, and I see that with my clients. Most of the people that come to Peak HR have that. They want to do things right. They want to treat their employees well. They want to do things by the book. They want to minimise their risk of obviously getting a tribunal claim. But it's a moral obligation. It's not just avoiding that tribunal claim. It's also about treating people fairly, treating them with dignity and respect throughout these processes as well. And that's a key factor in always avoiding the tribunal claims as well. It's about making people feel that they've been treated fairly at the end of the process, even if it means that they have lost their job.
Cheryl, thank you ever so much for that. I'm just going to summarize on those key topics. If you are an employer, make sure you do seek out someone like Cheryl Willie from PKHR to really understand the due process that you're going through. Coronavirus furlough is a new thing that's come out, obviously, and therefore that can bring some serious implications that you need to consider. Redundancy is going to be a natural phenomena that we're all going to see down the line. So again, it is a legal framework that you need to follow. You need to do what's right for you as a business, but you also need to do right by your employees. So make sure you reach out to Cheryl Willie from PKHR and save yourself a lot of stress and able for you to sleep well at night. So Cheryl, thank you ever so much for today's session.
You're very welcome. Thank you.